Welcome, Philippe.
Hello and good evening. Welcome. Bienvenidos, friends of the Hispanic Society, to the second installment of Las Tertulias de Arte Hispano, or Hispanic Art Gatherings, the second one of 2021, that is. Thank you once again to our members who have joined us monthly for almost a year. And welcome to all those who are tuning in for the first time. And there are quite a few, and I wonder why. Perhaps it has something to do with the subject today. We continue these conversations on the first Tuesday of each month at 6 p.m. If you are not a member yet, please do consider joining by going to our website, hispanicsociety.org, search for membership, and you'll find that under support. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking once again with the Hispanic Society's acting executive director and president, Margaret McQuade. Margaret will discuss a subject near and dear to many of our hearts and palates, chocolate. Her presentation is titled Chocolateros and Mancerinas, the Craze chocolates in the Hispanic world in English. It's not really an exact translation. A native New Yorker, Margaret has worked at the Hispanic Society for 27 years, going from curator to assistant director and curator, and she now serves as its acting director. Margaret spent time studying in the Dominican Republic, Spain, Mexico, and she received a PhD in art history from CUNY Graduate Center. She specializes in the decorative arts of Spain and the Americas with a particular focus on ceramic traditions. In addition to collaborating on several exhibitions in the US and abroad, she curated in 1999 the exhibitions Talavera Poblana, 4 centuries of Mexican ceramic tradition, and this was shown at the Americas Society as well as at the Museo Amparo in Puebla. She was also the curator for the exhibition of the ceramics of Alcora of the Hispanic Society, and it was held at the Museo de Bellas Artes de Castellón de la Plana, and in Valencia in 2005. More recently, Margaret has focused her time on capital projects, deepening the mission of the Hispanic Society for wider audiences. As you may know, after Margaret's presentation, we will have a brief conversation. We invite you to join us afterward by submitting your questions in the comments section. And you may submit these questions and your comments at any point during the discussion. So thank you all. And now here is Margaret McQuade.
Hello, Philippe. Good evening. Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's always a pleasure. I'm going to share my screen. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and even more so about this wonderful topic that's very dear to my heart. And I just want to warn you that I have a dog, 2 cats, a husband, a daughter, all of whom are home. So if you hear anything, hear them, my apologies in advance. So I thought chocolate is really such a wonderful topic, particularly on this snowy day that we're all experiencing here in New York, and especially as we approach Valentine's Day. Something that you may not know about me, but not only am I a fan of art, but I'm also a big fan of chocolate. In fact, I would say the entire staff, curiously, at the Hispanic Society shares a real obsession. Yeah.
Margaret, did you move away from your microphone?
Do I? Yeah.
It's much better, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. I was just saying that the entire staff are huge fans of chocolate, and one thing that we have sort of an unwritten rule of the Hispanic Society that whenever someone travels, whether it be for a conference, a courier trip, research, or even, I dare say, for vacation, we must return to the Hispanic Society with chocolate. And I'm telling you this not only as a subtle hint, but also because the idea of sharing chocolate has a wonderful history and a wonderful way of bringing people together. The subject also presents a wonderful way for us to better understand the social history of the Hispanic world. And it also illuminates many of the decorative arts and useful art forms that we often take for granted when we look at them in a museum setting. We have to remember that these objects, as beautiful as they are, were largely made to serve a purpose. So before I get to the objects, I thought it would be good to provide some backdrop on the history of chocolate in the Hispanic world. The wonderful thing about the subject of chocolate also is that it takes us on a journey through time and through space and allows us to explore how a single pod from a plant can have such a profound impact on a culture and the human experience. And I'm showing you here what the cacao tree looks like and what the pods are inside the pod. And Philippe, you and I spoke the other day about the difference between cacao and cocoa. Once the cacao bean is roasted and processed, you get the cocoa bean. So I just wanted to make that clear. Archaeologists in recent years have discovered that the cacao bean was domesticated around 3,600 years ago in the Amazon basin in South America. From South America, the vast trade networks that evolved over centuries brought the cacao to Central America, where it was cherished by the Olmec on the Gulf Coast of Mexico as early as 1000 BC, and in the highlands of Mesoamerica between 250 BC and 900 AD. The cacao bean was used as currency. It was also roasted, grounded into a paste with maize or corn, as well as spices to create a hot beverage. To create a froth, the liquid was poured from one vessel to another. It wasn't until later that sugar or a sweetener was added. The Maya created special vessels for preparing and consuming chocolate. We know this because glyphs on many of these vessels identified them for the purpose of drinking tree fresh cacao. And I'm showing you here a really beautiful vase from the Princeton University Art Museum that has glyphs at the top that identify who made the pot and for what purpose. You also have the god El, one of the lords of Xibalba, enjoying a good life with his 5 goddesses who were meeting his every need. The women behind him, who I'm showing you here, is frothing chocolate. Clearly, the chocolate beverage was reserved for nobility and the gods in this case, although it's believed to have been widely distributed, particularly during ceremonies. And you can see, I don't know if everyone can see, there's this very similar shaped vase. And below, unfortunately, the other vase has been obscured, but she would have been pouring it back and forth to create this froth. Shortly after the conquest of Mexico, Diego de Landa recorded in his Relación de las Cosas del Yucatán, he says, they make of ground maize and cacao a kind of foaming drink, which is very savory, and with which they celebrate their feast. And they get from cacao a grease which resembles butter, and from this and maize make another beverage which is very savory and highly thought of. They also parch the maize and grind it and mix it with water, thus making a very refreshing drink, throwing in a little Indian pepper or cacao. The Nahua, known to many of us as the Aztec, were especially fond of chocolate. Because the cacao tree was not cultivated in central basin of Mexico, they relied on the vast tribute system to keep up with the demand. According to some sources, they brought the equivalent of 23 tons of cacao beans annually. Moctezuma and his family are reported to have consumed over 1 million beans annually, which is quite spectacular. The image of the Nahua woman from this Codex Tudela it similarly shows a ritual aspect of the pouring of the chocolate from one cup to another. The Aztecs used polychrome pottery or painted lacquer gourds to serve their chocolate. They called these vessels chicali, a word that would later be replaced with the word jicara, and I'll return to that in a moment. It took a while for Europeans to become accustomed to the taste for the chocolate beverage, although they certainly took notice of the positive effects. It did, after all, contain caffeine. In 1575, the Italian Hieronimo Benzoni described the following after returning from the New World. It, being chocolate, seems more a drink for pigs than a drink for humanity. I was in this country of Mexico for more than a year and never wanted to taste it. But then there was a shortage of wine, and so not to be always drinking water, I did like others. The taste is somewhat bitter. It satisfies and refreshes the body, but it does not inebriate, and it is the best and most expensive merchandise according to the Indians of that country. As early as 1538, Bernal Diaz de Castillo mentions Spanish women in Mexico drinking chocolate with its foam from gold and silver cups at a banquet hosted by Cortez and the first viceroy of Mexico, who was Antonio de Mendoza. In 1590, Jesuit Jose de Acosta reports that the main benefit of the cocoa is a beverage which they make called chocolate, which is a crazy thing valued in this country. Quote, it disgusts those who are not used to it, for it has a foam on the top, or scum-like bubble, and the Spanish men, and even more the women, the Spanish women, are addicted to the black chocolate. It was not long after the Spanish arrived in the Americas that the chocolate beverage and the cacao beans made their way into most viceregal kitchens. The hot chocolate would be heated in a copper pot, similar to those we see in these paintings. And you see on the painting on the right is this African woman heating up her chocolate over here on the far right. The boy, by the way, is with his father preparing tobacco, which is a whole nother topic we can talk about. On the left, we see this wonderful painting by Antonio Perez de Aguilar, in which we see the same type of vessel inside with the jicara, which is likely, here it was lacquered. But what's important here is this wonderful framing device that can be locked. And so I'm showing this to you because chocolate, which of course was probably in a paste in one of these wooden containers, really needed to be locked up and stored safely. Chocolate was among the number of spices and ingredients that were expensive and needed to be carefully guarded. In Puebla, Mexico, potters transformed their common jars, which were based on the Chinese ginger jar, into a storage jar for chocolate with a lockable lid. These became known in Mexico as chocolateros. Potters also emulated the lacquer cup into glazed ceramics, which were more practically to hold the hot beverage. These became known as Hikarus, after the Nahua term we discussed earlier. The jicara form was soon refined into a smaller, slender cup based on a Chinese teacup, which I'm showing you here on the right. The porcelain cup was one of thousands of porcelain vessels excavated from the Templo Mayor site adjacent to the Zocalo in the main square of Mexico City. The cup on the left I'm showing you is from Puebla, Mexico, and was likely commissioned for the Dominican monastery. Unfortunately, very little documentation survives in the workshops of Puebla. However, we can assume that the form of the cups were modified so that they would fit into these stands, which I'm showing you here at the top, that were made specifically to serve the beloved chocolate, and those came to be called Mancerinas. According to legend, Don Pedro Alvarez de Toledo, the Marquis of Mancera and Viceroy of Peru from 1639 to 1648, had a tremor and commissioned the special chocolate stand with reticulated ring at the center to hold the chocolate and to keep it from spilling. The form was therefore named after the Marqués de Mancera. The need for these specialized vessels reflected the importance of the drink as well as the ritual behind its consumption. Apparently, by the end of the 17th century, the addiction to chocolate was such that the people, and women in particular, could not get through Mass without consuming it. According to English Dominican friar Thomas Gage, who traveled to Mexico and Guatemala from 1625 to 1637, quote, Women had their servants deliver the chocolate during Mass, which could not be done without great confusion and interruption. Gage further explains that the bishops ended the practice and threatened to excommunicate the women. To solve the dilemma, the women decided, rather than stopping their practice of receiving their chocolate during Mass, instead they decided to go to Mass not in the church, but rather in the convents. Threats were issued and swords were apparently drawn at one point, which is quite fascinating. And given the importance of chocolate, even in the convents, it should come as no surprise that the poor bishop died after drinking a cup of poisoned chocolate. And here's a larger image of these wonderful silver Mancerinas. By the mid-16th century, the shipments of the cacao bean, as well as the ever-evolving taste for chocolate, began to arrive in Spain and soon traveled throughout Europe. By the close of the 16th century, chocolate became popular among aristocrats and imperial courts in Spain, and physicians were beginning to take sides into whether chocolate could be used for medicinal purposes. Recipes were published in 17th century volumes, such as this volume from the Hispanic collection, titled Cuestión Moral, si el chocolate quebranta el ayuno eclesiástico. And I translate, the moral question: does consuming chocolate break a religious fast? But this is by Antonio Leon Pinelo. It was first printed in 1638, and we're fortunate to have this book in our collection. I find it fascinating because on one hand, there were controversies among the ecclesiastical authorities about the stimulating effects of chocolate, and they tried to prohibit consumption at various times in the 17th century. However, the book also includes recipes for preparing chocolate in different ways and how they may be used to cure certain ailments. Despite the ongoing controversies, chocolate became acceptable at the Spanish court of the Habsburg kings, and from there it made its way to the noble tables throughout Europe. This is a wonderful painting, still life painting, by the Spanish artist Antonio Pereira. It represents the objects needed for the preparation, display, and consumption of chocolate. The table is covered with a beautiful red cloth, a color associated with the Spanish court, as if in preparation for a merienda, or a Spanish snack that you share with friends. The chocolate pot is over here on the left. The molinillo, which you see right over here, is the wooden whisk that you would use to froth the chocolate. And in the front, on the left, you see 3 Hikarus from different parts. The 2 in the front are probably from Spain. You have one in Leicester, one maybe perhaps from Talavera, could also be Dutch, and the chipped one in the back is likely Chinese porcelain. And I love the fact he shows a chipped vessel here, because even with the chip, it was worth keeping and not throwing out as some would do. You also see here these wonderful wooden containers that we saw in the other painting, where you would have keep your paste, your chocolate paste. And of course, you always, in any service of chocolate, you would have biscuits or some kind of sweet to eat with it. And then the cabinet, we see this beautiful ebony cabinet in the back, with is shown with a key, was likely used to store the chocolate. We also have a lacquer gourd up here on the top, also known as the hikara we mentioned before, and some of these vessels, which I've spoken about before, from Tonalá or possibly from Portugal. So it really shows the sort of the worldliness of these settings. I also want to point out the sugar lump over here on the right. In 1670, noblewoman Maria Rebuten Chantal practically confessed about her addiction to chocolate. Quote, "I took it a day before yesterday to digest my dinner, to have a good meal. I took it yesterday to nourish me so that I could fast until evening. It gave me all the effects I wanted. That's what I like about it. It acts according to my intention," which is really wonderful. And another quote from 1680, Madame d'Aulnoy, a French noblewoman visiting the Spanish court, wrote with dismay that the Spanish ladies drank 6 cups of chocolate one after another, and that this they do very often, twice or 3 times a day. The most distinct of all the vessels produced for chocolate was no doubt the Mancerina. Originally, we saw it made in silver, which I'm showing you here on the left, but popularized in ceramic by the Royal Ceramic Workshop of Alcora in Castellón in Central Eastern Spain. The first Mancerina produced were monochrome blue and white in the Beren style, but other options were soon available and could be ordered to match your dinner service. And here I'm showing you a Mancerina in the Rocalla style with its matching cup. And I'm very pleased to say that we have both the Hikarus as well as the Mancerina. I'm showing you here a printed list that we have in the Hispanic Society collection of an archive from the factory. And you'll have to trust me that over here, amongst all the different forms you could order for your service, is a Mancerina. Now, if you were to purchase a service for your home, you would need at least more than the number of people you would have a service for. So it's quite remarkable that if you have a service for 12, you'll need 18 Mancerinas. And also here, just to point out, this is your options for the style as well as the color that you could have. And this document is from 1749. And of course, they came in a wide variety of forms. You have the round form, you have the shell shape, which is quite the most common. And then you have this wonderful form in the shape of a dove, which is kind of looking to the English creamware. Before we end, I just want to share with you some wonderful images of how chocolate was served at social gatherings that came to be called Chocolateados. And here is a wonderful drawing by Manuel Tramullas. Here is a tile panel, quite large tile panel from the Museo de Cerámica in Barcelona, showing quite a festival taking place outdoors. And here you can see the preparation of the chocolate. And then over here, these people, men and women, enjoying the service of chocolate together. Here is another set of tiles where we see people serving chocolate. These are from also from Alcora. And then over here on the left, I love this one because unfortunately they did not have the good sense to use a Mancerina, and therefore their chocolate has now spilled, causing quite a problem. But of course here, this woman has her Mancerina, her Hikarus with the chocolate, and is even able to hold some little cookies in addition to that. So I'd like to end with a quote from a prominent Spanish writer, Francisco Quevedo, who lived between 1580 and 1645. And he recorded in his The Guest, the Lady, and the Tattletale. There arrived chocolate and tobacco devils, who, although I had suspicion, never thought were really devils. They said they had taken their revenge on Spain on behalf of the Indies, meaning the Americas, since they did more evil when they introduced into Spain powder, smoke, chocolate cups, and the chocolate whippers that all the evil done by the Catholic kings Columbus and Cortez combined. Chocolates or slave labor to stay competitive. This has prompted grassroots efforts for large chocolate companies to reconsider how they get their cocoa supply. It also resulted in the appeal for more, quote, fair trade chocolate, which is created in an ethical and sustainable way. So when you buy your chocolate, your Valentine chocolate this year, please look to purchase fair trade. And I hope that this is very quick overview of a short period of chocolate production in the Hispanic world has been quite pleasing to you. And I hope that you've been able to see that it had such an extraordinary impact on the daily life, as well as new vessel forms that emerged during this period, as well as the recipes that have evolved and continue to evolve today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret, for absolutely wonderful presentation. I can't wait to rush and get my cup of chocolate. And I confess also my tobacco, but that's another thing. You presented and you showed a fascinating pamphlet about the morality of chocolate and whether, in fact, drinking a cup of chocolate represented breaking a fast. But you left us hanging. You didn't tell us what the answer was.
So it's a great question, and I'm not sure they have, Pinello gives us the answer, but it is a serious question that he proposes, in that he actually takes various considerations. So I think to him, he wasn't sure. There's not a clear answer, but I think he's proposing the dilemma of what to do with chocolate. What is interesting, though, as I mentioned, is that he also includes recipes for chocolate. So I think he's torn, and he's looking for, he too is looking for the answer.
Margaret, I know there'll be other questions from the audience, but I really have a few. The Spaniards initially thought it was a very bitter drink. Do we know at what point and whether maybe it's a European edition that sugar was added to chocolate?
So sugar was added, and it's a good question to think about. We do know that the Aztecs had honey, and were known to add honey to the chocolate. And maybe that's what gave the Spaniards, the idea to introduce a sweetener. But it was the Spanish that started to use sugar in their chocolate. And certainly by the time it goes to Spain, there was a lot of sugar that was added.
Another quick question. If I wanted to be very traditional and to serve chocolate to my guests, would I be able to buy commercially made Mancerinas today?
So you can. I don't know that they're widely available. You don't necessarily see them used in restaurants or even chocolatiers that you see even in Spain. But you can buy them. I know the workshops in Alcora were selling them at one point. I was gifted one years ago when I was in Castellón. And I don't have it at home. I actually brought it to the Hispanic Society. So we have a modern reproduction of one of these wonderful Mancerinas. What I do have, though, is the Hikarus from Mexico that continues to be produced today, and it's the handleless cup in sort of the more traditional form. So those you can find.
One last question before I turn it over to our audience, which has to do with the first image that you showed from the Mayan vessel, where they are pouring from a very high distance. Now, we've all had waiters who pour tea from very high up and so forth, and in the Middle East, a great deal of that. But I was wondering, you spoke about froth and foam at the top. Do you think it would have been to create foam?
There's no doubt, because that's what the literature tells us, that it was designed to, by moving it back and forth and kind of aerating it, that it was intended to produce this foam. Later, the Spanish and when they arrive in Mexico, they start to use a molinillo, a wooden frother, or like a whisk, to create that same effect.
Well, I'm going to take it over to Alex Campos to relate some of the questions from the audience, but I do want to make the comment that I'll never forget one of the things that impressed me most when I took a course on the painter Goya more than, I guess, 75 years ago, that I was told at the time that Goya was literally addicted to chocolate and could always be found late in the afternoon in one of the chocolate bars of Madrid.
That's wonderful.
Alex, do you have anything from our audience?
Hello, Philippe and Margaret. This is Christina coming in. Thank you so much for a great talk, Margaret. We actually have quite a few questions from the audience. And the first one is, do any textiles, such as the one in the Pereira painting, survive?
Geez, let me see if I can find that. Certainly the textiles are wonderful textiles. I can share my screen and go back to that. Certainly they do survive. And let's see if I can. They do survive. We have some extraordinary textiles at the Hispanics. Oh, here we go. You're talking about this piece right here. Yes, absolutely, they do survive because of just the nature of textiles. They some are in better shape than others, but you can certainly find examples in various museum collections. And if whoever is asking the question, if you would like to email me, I can certainly send you to the museums that do have a holding of those types of textiles.
Wonderful, thank you. And the next question is there any difference in use between the object when it's referred to as a Mancerina versus when it is called a trembleuse, or are both for chocolate?
It's a great question. You know, there's probably a debate, although I would argue to disagree with some of my French colleagues as to who invented the Mancerina or trembleuse. The trembleuse had the same purpose, from what I understand. It was to hold a vessel for chocolate. They didn't always have the same forms that they had in Alcora. But Alcora, what's interesting is that Alcora was founded in 1727 with French potters from the south of France, from Moustier and Marseille. So it's not surprising that they shared forms and decorations, particularly at a time in Spain when you had, you know, the shift from the Habsburgs to the Bourbons. So there was very much, the styles of Versailles were very present in Spain in the 18th century. So there's no surprise that they shared styles and designs during this period.
Wonderful, thank you. And this question is actually related to a topic that you brought up in one of your previous tertulias. And the question is, were Hikarus to be eaten on Spanish America? In the Madrid court, eating earthenware was supposed to be good for women's complexion. And the audience member has referred to the Infanta in the Meninas.
So first of all, to answer the question, the jicara the jicara originally was made in lacquer, and lacquer was not eaten. I did give a talk on the vessels, the burnished vessels from Tonalá, which were low-fired vessels and are known to have been consumed. The glazed ceramic would not be something that anybody would want to eat. It also would be poisonous because it had lead. So I don't recommend it, and I don't think anyone would recommend even in that period. As far as Las Meninas, the vessel in Las Meninas, I almost wish I had shown it in my talk. It's up for debate of whether that piece in Las Meninas is from Tonalá. It very well could be Portuguese. So I think we sometimes have to be careful when we identify things, because the Portuguese also had a tradition, an important tradition of unglazed burnished pottery, very similar to what we see in Tonalá. And I think more work is needed to really understand the difference. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that there's a great debate to continue the conversation.
Yes, absolutely. And another question we have is, what were the effects the church was fearful of? Was it fasting alone or a sort of ecstasy? It's interesting, the observations then of how males and females imbibed.
I think, it is interesting, and there's a whole nother study of how chocolate was an aphrodisiac. I didn't take it in that direction, but there certainly is a discussion about what chocolate, how it was used, and what it did to people. I think it was a stimulant, and maybe there was a fear, what would happen if you, particularly with women. As far as the church is concerned, I think it was not so much as the effect, I imagine. I mean, most of us who've had chocolate, you can see when I give my daughter, when she was 3 years old, I gave her chocolate, she was running around like a maniac. I don't know if it was exactly the effect or the fear of, too much of something, or really the obsession that people had for chocolate. They needed more. I mean, we all have that. Once you taste a piece of chocolate and it's delicious, you want more of it. And I think it was more of the obsession than the actual effect of what happened. And I think the fact that they didn't know, I mean, it's like with any drug, we don't know what the long-term effect is. And I think that the church was concerned with all these people who were so obsessed with the chocolate, what the long-term impact would be, and sort of a loss of control. But that's just my thought. I think it's deserves further consideration.
Thank you. And I don't know, Margaret, this is a question for you. If you happen to know if there are other examples of foam or froth as an essential part of a ritual dish or beverage?
I'm sure there is. I'm not a food historian, but just, I think rice sometimes can have a foamy, when you cook things in certain ways. I definitely think that there's something to that. At the top of my head, I can't say what those other things are. Milk, I think, can be, and certainly in other countries, you might sort of learn more about how that frothing appears.
And actually, this is a related question. Do you happen to know when chocolate was first cooked in milk, as in the Mexican style of frothed hot chocolate?
So it's a great question, and I think it doesn't happen until the 19th century. A couple things happen. It had always been consumed as a beverage. They started to use sugar to make it into a paste and create cocoa butter to make it into bars. But milk was also added instead of water. And I think it was Linz who also invented a machine that aerated the chocolate to give her a smoother texture so that it would sort of melt in your mouth and sort of consistency, and it would be blended with other ingredients. But that really doesn't happen until the 19th century.
And I think I'm going to maybe end on this lighter question. And I have no idea if you know the answer, but there is the famous Chocolateria San Ginés in Madrid. And do you happen to know if it's still open? I mean, I'm hoping that they've survived this past year, but it's very famous.
Yes, no, I'm very familiar with it, and I would hope that it's still open. I think one thing that I love about the Spanish is that they really, tradition is important to them. And I would hope that they would keep them in business, but I'm not sure. I think we should all see if they're in business and try to support them to keep them in business.
Perfect. Thank you. And actually, if it's okay, I'm going to ask just one final question. and it's about the Mancerinas that you showed today, which I believe were mostly from Spain. And do you happen to know if they were also produced in Mexico?
So the silver Mancerina that I showed you was made in Mexico. I have seen a Mancerina that was produced in Mexico, but they're extremely rare. And unfortunately, I did not have an image, but they were not as widely produced as they were in Spain.
Great. Thank you both so much again.
My pleasure. Philippe, you're muted.
Most people would like me muted, but here I'm unmuted. Thank you very much, Margaret, for really this absolutely fascinating and well, alléchant talk. And I just very eager to look at some of the objects very much in person and travel to Madrid and find those places open. I want to thank all of our members, not only for their attendance, we had a very high number today, but also for your questions, your very good questions. We are thrilled our community, our supporters continue to stay involved with the Hispanic Society Museum and Library, despite this inability that we have to join in person. We hope you've got some chocolate or other sweet treats near you after this very tantalizing and very appetizing presentation. I want to remind everyone that our next Tertulia will take place on Tuesday, March the 2nd at 6 p.m. And Monica Katz from our Objects Conservation Department will be speaking, and she will be talking about lacquer works, non-edible lacquer works from our collection. So until next time, and buen provecho and have a wonderful time. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Margaret, for great presentation.
Good night. Thank you. It's always a pleasure. Have a good night.
Thank you.